He lived a life that many people would never understand. On the outside, he seemed like an ordinary man with an ordinary job. He walked the streets quietly, smiled politely at neighbors, and kept to himself most days. People who saw him in the grocery store or at the park would never have guessed that he had faced dangers most could not even imagine. He had been trained to survive situations that were life and death, to act when others froze, and to make choices in seconds that could save or end lives. Yet now he sought nothing more than peace. His home was modest but welcoming. It wasn't a mansion or a fortress. It was a place that felt lived in. The walls carried a few pictures of his family, some faded photographs of places he had been, and medals and awards carefully stored in drawers out of sight. He didn't like to talk about his past. It wasn't pride that kept him silent, it was necessity. He knew that revealing too much could change the way people looked at him, and he wanted a life that was simple and calm. But there was one companion who made the house feel alive, one presence that reminded him why he kept going. His dog, a large, loyal creature with a coat of dark brown and eyes that seemed to understand more than most humans, was the center of his small world. They had been together for years, bonded through quiet evenings and long walks. The dog had been with him during the nights when sleep didn't come, when the memories of missions past crept into his mind, and when he questioned whether anyone would ever truly understand the life he had lived. He would often wake up early, even before the sun had risen, and the dog would be waiting patiently at the foot of the bed. Their mornings began with long walks through the neighborhood, the air crisp and quiet, the streets mostly empty. People would occasionally nod as they passed, and he would nod back, always careful not to draw attention to himself. These walks were simple routines, but they were sacred. They allowed him to breathe, to feel normal, and to enjoy a sense of freedom that his past had denied him for so long. Evenings were spent in a similar quiet fashion. Sometimes he would sit on the porch with a book, the dog resting its head on his feet. Other times he would cook simple meals, enjoying the mundane but comforting rhythms of civilian life. He liked the normality of it, the sense that he was no longer on high alert, no longer in a world where one wrong move could mean disaster. The world outside was unpredictable, but at least inside he had control. Yet despite all this calm, he carried the weight of the past in ways no one could see. Memories of missions replayed like old films in his mind. He remembered deserts that stretched endlessly under a burning sun, nights so cold they cut through every layer of clothing, and cities where danger hid behind every corner. He remembered the faces of people he had saved, and the ones he hadn't been able to. The decisions he had made, which were necessary at the time, still haunted him on quiet nights. These memories were like shadows, never fully leaving, always waiting. It was during one of these quiet mornings that he noticed the subtle changes in his neighborhood. A few new faces appeared in the windows of houses that had once been empty. Cars he didn't recognize parked along the streets. He paid attention to these things not out of paranoia but out of habit. Habits formed during years of training didn't just disappear. They became part of who he was. He noticed tension in the air even when no one else seemed to. The dog, as if sensing something too, stayed close. When children ran by on their way to school, the dog would watch intently, ears perked, ready to react if necessary. He smiled sometimes at the sight, but there was always a small edge of caution in his mind. The bond they shared was not just companionship. It was understanding. The dog had been trained in small ways, taught to be alert, to respond, to protect. It wasn't about aggression. It was about awareness. And in the quiet mornings and evenings, they both found comfort in knowing the other was watching. Ready and present, despite wanting a quiet life. He could not ignore the small injustices he sometimes saw around him. People walking with fear in their eyes, neighbors arguing over petty things, and the presence of authorities patrolling the streets. He knew how fear could escalate situations. He knew how small misunderstandings could spiral into danger. In his mind, he ran through scenarios, thinking of how to avoid conflict and keep peace, not through intimidation, but through careful observation and calm action. The town had its share of challenges: economic struggles, minor crimes, and occasional disputes that flared up like sudden storms. But nothing compared to what he had seen in his life. His past had taught him patience, restraint, and the value of choosing when and where to act. And he acted always in ways that would protect the innocent, even if that sometimes meant hiding his true abilities. No one would suspect the calm man walking his dog in the park was someone who had faced situations most people could only read about in books. He spent his days maintaining this delicate balance. At work, he was polite and efficient, never drawing attention to himself. His colleagues saw him as reliable but quiet, someone who kept to his own space. There were moments when conversations brushed against topics of danger or security, and he would answer in simple ways, avoiding the truth. It wasn't deceit. It was protection for himself and for everyone around him. His identity was a secret, not because he wanted fame or recognition, but because peace required it. Even in mundane errands, he remained observant. Grocery stores, banks, even the corner coffee shop. He noticed exits, the movement of people, and small details others missed. It was automatic, a part of him that could never be turned off. At times it made life tiring, constantly aware of what could go wrong, but he had learned to channel that awareness into calm, to live in the world while carrying the knowledge of what danger truly meant. One afternoon, as he returned from a long walk with his dog, he noticed a small crowd gathering near a street he often used. People whispered and gestured toward a house nearby. He slowed, keeping a respectful distance, and observed. There was tension in their faces, unease that he could feel without being close. His dog stayed alert, muscles coiled as if expecting something to happen. He didn't approach, didn't intervene, just watched. Years of experience had taught him that sometimes the best action was none at all until the right moment. Despite the calm exterior, inside he felt the stirrings of something he couldn't ignore. The sense that life, even in its ordinary rhythm, was never truly predictable. Something small could spark something big, and though he wanted to remain hidden, to live quietly, he knew the world didn't always allow such peace. Still, he returned home with his dog, maintaining the illusion of ordinary life as neighbors waved and children played in the yard. Life went on, but he remained aware, alert, and ready. Evenings in his house were the same as mornings, quiet, safe, and comforting. He would sit in the living room, the dog at his feet, sometimes reading, sometimes just staring at the window as the sun set. The dog rested its head on his lap, offering warmth and companionship. It was a simple existence, but it was precious. He valued these small moments, knowing that peace was fragile and fleeting. And yet there was an underlying tension, a whisper in the back of his mind that life could shift in an instant. He had seen it before, countless times. What was ordinary one moment could become chaos the next. He had faced it countless times in deserts, cities, and jungles far from home. Now in the quiet of his neighborhood, he carried that knowledge like a shadow, unseen but always present. The bond with his dog grew stronger every day. The dog was not just a pet. It was a guardian, a friend, and a witness to the life he now tried to live. When he spoke, the dog listened. When he rested, the dog stayed close. And when he felt the weight of memories pressing down, the dog's presence reminded him that some things in life were worth holding on to, worth protecting, worth fighting for in whatever quiet ways he could. Life went on in these patterns, peaceful yet fragile, ordinary yet layered with unseen intensity. He walked the streets, worked his job, and spent evenings in quiet companionship. Neighbors saw only the calm exterior. They never knew the depth of his past, the sharpness of his skills, or the discipline that had been honed in life and death situations. He carried it all quietly, allowing no one to see the storm within. And for a while this life seemed enough. Peaceful mornings, quiet afternoons, safe evenings, and the company of a loyal dog. The outside world continued, unaware of the silent strength that moved among them. A man living with restraint, carrying a history that could change everything if revealed. The dog slept at his feet, the house was calm, and for the first time in a long while he felt a sense of stability. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets, there was a subtle shift in the air. Something was coming. Something unexpected, something that could disrupt the fragile balance he had built. He didn't know it yet, but the calm days were numbered. And as he looked down at his dog, lying peacefully on the floor, he silently vowed to protect this small world, no matter what storm might approach. The morning started like any other. The man and his dog walked along familiar streets, the sky painted in soft shades of gold and pink. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wet earth from last night's rain. The dog moved with calm energy, sniffing the edges of lawns and occasionally lifting its head to check on its owner. He felt the quiet joy of this routine, the sense of normal life, of small pleasures that required no heroism, no battle, no vigilance beyond ordinary care. He waved to a neighbor who was tending to their garden, and the neighbor waved back, smiling. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing unusual except for the distant sound of sirens that had faded into the background. In this neighborhood, sirens were a common part of life, and he hardly noticed them anymore. But his dog reacted instantly. Its ears perked, body tensing slightly, eyes narrowing toward the sound. He reached for the leash, feeling the slight pull as the dog leaned toward the source of tension. It was instinctive, protective, almost as if the dog could sense danger before it became visible. They continued their walk. But a few blocks away, the quiet was disrupted by a group of police vehicles turning sharply onto the street. The man's attention sharpened immediately, trained eyes scanning movements, angles, and positions. He could feel the tension rising in his dog as well, the hair along its back standing slightly taller. The officers were moving fast, some looking around nervously, radios crackling with static messages. He couldn't hear everything, but he sensed the urgency, the uncertainty, and a flicker of fear that seemed to ripple through the neighborhood. It didn't take long for the situation to become clear. A call had come into the police department, one of those calls where the details were confusing, incomplete, and potentially misleading. Someone had reported a strange figure with a large dog, behaving aggressively near a local street. The truth was far less dramatic. The man was simply walking his dog, but the officers approached as if preparing for confrontation. The man slowed, trying to remain visible, showing no signs of threat. He kept the dog close to his side, leash held firmly but without tension. He knew instinctively that any sudden movement, any misinterpreted action could escalate the situation. The dog sensed his calmness and adjusted, still alert but not acting aggressively. He kept his hands visible, taking slow, deliberate steps, hoping the officers would notice the lack of danger. But the officers were already on edge. They hadn't expected someone trained to de-escalate situations. They hadn't expected control, discipline, or calm. They were only seeing a man with a large dog. And in the moment of uncertainty, fear clouded judgment. Commands were shouted, loud and confusing. The man's ears registered every word, but the dog, startled by the shouting, barked once sharply. That single bark was enough to change everything. In an instant, the officers reacted. One drew a weapon. Another shouted more commands. The situation escalated with frightening speed. The dog, trying to protect its owner, backed away slightly, growling low in its throat. The man froze, heart pounding but mind clear. He knew he could handle the situation physically if needed. But he also knew that violence now would only make things worse. He could feel the tension building, the energy of the neighborhood shifting. People stopped and stared from windows and yards, sensing that something had gone terribly wrong. Then it happened. A shot rang out. The sound was loud, echoing off the walls of houses, sharp and final. The dog yelped, a sound that pierced through the man's chest more painfully than any enemy's attack had ever done. He rushed forward, but the officers, seeing movement, fired again. His instincts screamed to protect, to act, to respond with force, but he restrained himself. The training that had saved lives in distant wars now demanded control in a moment that tested everything he had learned about patience, restraint, and humanity. The dog lay on the ground, trembling, eyes wide with fear and pain. The man knelt beside it, hands trembling slightly as he tried to comfort his companion. Blood stained the fur, and the sound of the neighborhood faded into a background hum of confusion and shock. People stared, some horrified, some unsure what had just happened. He whispered to the dog, words of comfort that felt inadequate in the face of such sudden loss. The officers finally moved closer, weapons still drawn, faces tight with tension and uncertainty. "Step back," one shouted. But the man didn't move away from his dog. He stayed kneeling, hands hovering protectively over the animal, speaking softly. "It's okay," he said, voice calm but urgent. "It's okay. Just stay still." The dog, sensing his presence, whimpered but did not move. Neighbors began to emerge, murmuring, asking questions, some recording on their phones. The tension was palpable. The man felt a mixture of rage, grief, and disbelief. His dog, his loyal companion, had been shot by people who did not understand, who could not see the truth, who acted on fear and assumption rather than reality. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to make them understand, but he knew that losing control would only worsen the situation. He had trained himself to survive in chaos, to act decisively, but also to hold back when unnecessary. This was one of those moments. He looked at the officers, noticing the fear and hesitation in their eyes. They didn't know him. They didn't know what he could do. And yet, he restrained himself, gripping the leash tightly, using his voice to calm the situation. "I'm not a threat," he said quietly. "You don't need to do this. My dog is hurt. Please help." The words were simple, but every syllable carried authority, precision, and an underlying weight of someone who had survived far worse. Paramedics were called, and the officers finally lowered their weapons. The man stayed with the dog, whispering words of comfort as someone from the crowd covered the dog in a light blanket. His mind raced, thinking through what had just happened, replaying every moment. He analyzed the situation as a soldier would, how the call escalated, how the officers reacted, and what could have been done differently. Every decision, every reaction, every choice of movement had consequences. And yet now he could do nothing but wait and hope. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The dog, despite its pain, remained alive, and the man focused on that. He stroked its fur, talking to it, trying to soothe the fear and confusion. He felt tears burning in his eyes, a rare display of emotion that had little place in the world he had once lived in. This was personal, not strategic. The grief was sharp, immediate, and unforgiving. His heart ached, not from battle wounds or missions lost, but from the loss inflicted by misunderstanding and fear. People from the neighborhood watched, some in silence, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Whispers spread, questions forming in their minds. How could this happen? Why did they act so quickly? But no one understood the depth of the connection between man and dog, or the life he had tried to build quietly. They only saw the surface. A man kneeling over a wounded animal, officers tense and uncertain. The fragile balance of peace shattered in a few short seconds. When the paramedics arrived, they worked quickly, lifting the dog carefully, assessing the injuries. The man followed closely, ensuring that the dog was treated with care, that every action was precise and deliberate. His knowledge of emergency care, honed through field experience, guided him as he assisted and communicated. He stayed calm, focused, using every ounce of discipline he had cultivated over years of training to keep the situation from spiraling further. As the dog was loaded into the ambulance, the man allowed himself a moment to step back, to breathe, and to process the sudden violence of the morning. Rage and grief were tangled in his chest, and he felt the weight of the world pressing down, but he also felt clarity. He knew he could not act recklessly, could not let the pain dictate his next moves. He had survived countless missions, faced enemies trained to kill, navigated chaos and betrayal, and yet here, in his own neighborhood, a misunderstanding had nearly taken everything from him. He climbed into the car behind the ambulance, holding the leash in his hands, and watched as the paramedics worked tirelessly. His dog whimpered softly, leaning against his shoulder, and he whispered reassurances. "I've got you. You're going to be okay." Every word was sincere, carrying a promise of protection and care. Despite the chaos and fear, he was still the anchor, the calm in the storm. He knew his training would guide him through the aftermath, even if he could not undo what had already happened. As the ambulance drove away, the man remained standing on the street, surveying the neighborhood. The officers had moved back, some speaking into radios, others observing. The crowd had thinned, leaving only a few curious neighbors. He noticed the fear in some eyes, the confusion in others, and he felt a cold realization. This incident would not be easily forgotten. Misunderstandings like these left scars, not just physical, but emotional and social. He returned home slowly, dogless for the moment, but carrying the weight of what had happened. His hands still shook slightly, not from physical strain, but from the intensity of the moment. He replayed every second, thinking through what had occurred, analyzing actions, anticipating reactions. The calm exterior he had cultivated for years was cracked but not broken. He knew the coming hours, days, and weeks would require every ounce of patience, intelligence, and restraint he possessed. Sitting in his living room, he allowed himself to rest briefly, closing his eyes and breathing deeply. The dog would recover, he told himself, and he would be there for every step of that journey. But something had shifted. The quiet life he had worked so hard to maintain had been intruded upon, and he knew that the world outside was unpredictable. Fear, misunderstanding, and assumptions had nearly destroyed the life he had built, and though he would not act recklessly, he would not ignore what had happened. He opened his eyes and looked at the empty spot on the floor where his dog usually slept. The absence was a reminder of how quickly peace could be shattered. He would fight for his companion, yes, but also for understanding, for justice, and for the fragile sense of normalcy that had been broken in a single moment. The calm mornings, peaceful walks, and quiet evenings would have to be rebuilt, and he was determined to do so, not with anger or vengeance, but with discipline, intelligence, and the unwavering love he carried for his dog. Even in the quiet of the evening, as he prepared for what was to come, he knew that nothing would ever be quite the same. The streets he had walked every day now felt charged, alive with the memory of what had happened. The world, always uncertain, had revealed itself in stark detail, and he, trained for chaos yet craving peace, understood that his life had shifted irreversibly. But he also understood one thing clearly: he would protect what mattered most, no matter the cost. After the chaos of that morning, the man sat alone in his home, the silence of the house pressing in on him like a weight. The sound of the ambulance sirens had faded hours ago, but the echoes of that moment remained vivid in his mind. His dog was safe for now, receiving care, but the memory of seeing it hurt, the feeling of helplessness as the shots rang out, haunted him. He ran his hands through his hair, trying to find calm, but his mind refused to settle. He knew that what had happened could not simply be ignored. The officers had acted out of fear, out of misunderstanding, and in that split second they had caused tremendous pain. But he also understood the danger of letting anger take over. He had survived in some of the most dangerous places on earth because he controlled his emotions, because he acted with precision and thought. This situation, though different, required the same discipline. Acting recklessly now would not bring back his dog's safety or restore balance. He began to think carefully about the steps ahead. First, he needed information. He needed to know exactly what had been reported to the police, who had been involved, and how the situation had escalated. He couldn't rely on emotion or assumptions. He had a plan. This was not about revenge, it was about justice, about protecting what he loved and preventing this kind of tragedy from happening again. As he prepared to make calls and gather details, his mind drifted back to the past, to experiences he had long kept buried. He had been trained to operate in environments where mistakes could cost lives, where observation, patience, and careful planning were everything. Every mission he had undertaken in the military had taught him to read situations, to understand human behavior under stress, and to anticipate threats before they became real. That knowledge, once used to face enemies across the world, was now focused on the neighborhood streets he had always thought were safe. The man sat quietly, thinking back to those missions. He remembered the nights when stealth and patience were the difference between life and death. He remembered the moments when he had to move silently through enemy territory, relying only on his training, his instincts, and his careful planning. In these memories, he could see the same qualities he now needed: patience, awareness, and control. He had survived extreme danger before, and he could survive this challenge too, but he had to approach it with the same clarity of mind. He began to reach out carefully. Phone calls were made, questions asked, facts recorded. He documented everything meticulously, knowing that small details could become critical. Each time he spoke to someone, he measured his tone, remained calm, and asked questions without anger. The officers had acted impulsively, but he would act with precision. He understood that patience now could achieve what force never could. While he worked, he couldn't stop thinking about the dog. The bond they shared went beyond companionship. It was loyalty, trust, and mutual understanding. The dog had been with him through long nights, through moments of fear and doubt, through the struggle to leave a violent past behind. Now injured and frightened, it depended on him to protect, to heal, and to restore a sense of safety. He visited the veterinarian, staying close to the dog, speaking softly, reassuring it that he was there. The dog leaned into him, a silent reminder that love and trust could endure even in the aftermath of violence. As he moved through these days, he realized that he had to be more than a man defending his dog. He had to navigate a system that often misunderstood and misjudged people. He had to protect himself too, without revealing more than necessary. People around him saw only the surface, a man grieving for his dog. They didn't see the discipline, the training, or the strength beneath the calm exterior, and he intended to keep it that way. The man's training also included understanding the mind of others. He knew that fear and misunderstanding could escalate conflict. He began to think strategically about how to interact with the officers, the authorities, and anyone else involved. He would remain calm, cooperative, and clear, presenting facts without emotion, allowing the truth to guide the outcome rather than anger or aggression. This approach, he knew, would maximize the chances of a fair resolution. Even as he navigated the bureaucratic side of the situation, he continued to reflect on what had happened. He thought about how quickly ordinary life could be disrupted, how a single misunderstanding could lead to fear, chaos, and unintended harm. He understood that people often acted out of instinct, out of the desire to protect themselves. He had seen the same reactions in hostile environments during his military service, and he understood them here too. Recognizing this didn't make it easier to accept, but it helped him see the situation clearly. In the quiet moments, he also reflected on his own limits. He had been trained to act decisively, to respond when lives were at stake, and to use his skills to protect others. But here, in the civilian world, the rules were different. He could not operate as he once had in foreign lands or hostile zones. He had to adapt, to balance his abilities with the expectations of a society that did not know what he was capable of. That was a challenge in itself, but one he accepted. He had adapted before, and he could do it again. He spent time planning the next steps carefully. Legal avenues would be pursued, evidence documented, and witnesses noted. He reached out to people he trusted, allies who could provide perspective, support, and assistance without complicating the situation. Every move was calculated, every decision measured, as he ensured that he remained in control. He knew that in the chaos of fear, clarity was the greatest weapon. At the same time, he began to consider the emotional recovery of the dog. Injuries, even minor ones, left both physical and psychological scars. He spent hours with the animal, coaxing it to eat, gently encouraging movement, and sitting beside it through restless nights. The dog responded to his presence, calming under the familiar sound of his voice. He realized that this bond, the trust between man and dog, was a source of strength, a reminder that some things were worth every effort to protect. Through these efforts, the man's Delta Force background quietly shaped his actions. Observation, patience, calmness under pressure, strategic thinking, all skills once used in distant battlefields, now guided him through paperwork, hospital visits, and neighborhood scrutiny. He remained disciplined in every interaction, refusing to allow frustration or anger to dominate. People saw a composed man, someone carefully navigating adversity, unaware of the lethal precision behind his calm. During these days, he also reflected on broader themes: responsibility, restraint, and morality. He had been trained to act decisively, sometimes lethally, yet here, the highest value was patience, understanding, and strategy. Protecting life, his dog's, his own, and even the lives of those who had acted recklessly, became his guiding principle. In this, he found a new form of strength, one that did not require violence but demanded wisdom and self-control. He began to revisit the streets where the incident occurred. Not recklessly, but carefully, noting changes, observing patterns, and thinking through the sequence of events. Every detail mattered: the positioning of officers, the timing of shots, the reaction of neighbors, and the behavior of his dog. This careful analysis was familiar. It reminded him of surveillance, reconnaissance, and planning during missions. The purpose was the same: understand the situation fully before acting, and act only with precision and clarity. At home, he created a quiet routine to maintain his focus. Morning walks resumed, though more cautious, and evenings remained moments of reflection and planning. He balanced these activities with visits to the dog, hospital checks, and careful documentation of events. Each day he felt the lingering tension of the incident, but also the growing clarity of purpose. He would not allow confusion, fear, or misunderstanding to dictate the outcome. The man also reflected on the human element. Fear could drive people to extreme actions. Ignorance could lead to tragedy, and small misunderstandings could escalate beyond reason. He understood this because he had seen it countless times in both combat zones and life beyond them. And he knew that understanding was key. Understanding how people acted, why they acted, and how to guide outcomes toward fairness and safety. Through all this, he maintained humility. He did not flaunt his skills or past. He did not intimidate or threaten. His discipline was quiet, internal, a strength that guided his choices without showing itself. Even when interacting with officials or community members, he maintained calm, respectful tones, letting facts speak for themselves. He understood that appearances mattered in this world as much as abilities did. At night, he would sit by the window, watching the neighborhood slowly quiet. The events of that morning replayed in his mind, but he approached them analytically rather than emotionally. He noted what could be learned, what steps should be taken next, and how to prevent similar situations. The dog, now recovering, lay nearby, occasionally lifting its head to meet his eyes. In those moments, he felt renewed determination. Protecting life, seeking justice, and maintaining peace were intertwined, and he would navigate them all with care and precision. The man knew that the coming days would test him further. Public perception, bureaucratic delays, and lingering tension among officers could complicate matters. But he had faced worse, endured more complex challenges, and emerged with control intact. He relied on the same principles now: observation, patience, strategic thinking, and calm execution. His past had prepared him for this, even if the environment seemed far removed from combat zones, and so he moved forward. Each day was deliberate, measured, and focused. Every call, every interaction, every step was considered in light of the lessons he had learned over years of training and life experience. His dog healed slowly but surely, a constant reminder of the bond that had been tested and survived. And as he walked the streets, watched by neighbors who remained unaware of the depths beneath his calm exterior, he carried with him the knowledge that resilience, patience, and strategy could overcome even the most sudden, terrifying moments. Though the incident had shaken him, it had not broken him. His past had taught him how to survive, but his present demanded that he navigate life with discipline, empathy, and clarity. And as he continued to move carefully, protectively, and deliberately through the world, he began to see a path forward, one that honored his dog, his life, and the principles that had carried him through every challenge before this one. The man's world had changed, even if the streets looked the same. Every step outside reminded him of that morning. Every glance at the empty spot where his dog had lain before the incident brought the memory back. He had expected calm after the chaos, but peace did not return so easily. The weight of responsibility pressed on him. He could not simply accept what had happened, yet he also could not allow his grief or anger to take over. Patience, strategy, and careful planning were his only options. He began to focus on what could be done. The dog was stable, resting at home under careful observation, but the man knew that physical healing was only part of the challenge. Emotional recovery mattered too for both the dog and himself. Fear had left marks, subtle but real. Every sudden noise made the dog flinch, every movement outside brought tension. He spent hours sitting beside it, speaking softly, keeping it close, showing that the world could still be safe. His own emotions mirrored this effort. He worked to remain calm, to manage the anger that bubbled beneath the surface, to channel energy into constructive action. The next step was seeking accountability. He began reaching out to legal professionals, careful not to rush into decisions but to gather advice and understand his options. He spoke clearly, calmly, and factually, outlining what had happened, the injuries inflicted on his dog, and the sequence of events he had documented. He avoided emotional exaggeration. He knew that clear facts carried more weight than outrage. The first consultations were quiet and professional, but they set a path forward. He would not seek vengeance, but he would pursue justice. Every interaction required careful thought. He anticipated questions, prepared answers, and planned his approach to ensure he remained calm under scrutiny. It was a lesson learned from years of training. Preparation was the foundation of control. People often underestimated calm, and he intended to use that to his advantage. He stayed composed even when frustration threatened to surface. He knew that losing control now could undo all of the careful planning he had undertaken since that morning. Meanwhile, news of the incident began to circulate in the neighborhood. Some neighbors expressed sympathy, others offered cautious support, and a few whispered questions that hinted at judgment or misunderstanding. The man did not respond to gossip. He observed quietly, recording patterns, noting inconsistencies in stories, and keeping track of witnesses who had seen events unfold. These details, seemingly small, could become essential. He understood that every interaction, every observation, could influence the outcome if handled properly. He also began to reflect on the broader issues at play. Fear, misunderstanding, and quick judgments could escalate situations into tragedy. People acted instinctively, often without full knowledge. He had seen similar patterns in the past, though in far more dangerous environments. Here, the stakes were different, but the dynamics were the same. Understanding this helped him navigate the complex social and bureaucratic landscape that lay ahead. It reminded him that justice was rarely immediate. It required patience, persistence, and intelligence. The man's training became a guiding force in his planning. He thought strategically, considering every potential obstacle. What would the officers say? How would the department respond? Could evidence be questioned? Who could verify his account? Every possibility was analyzed and contingencies were prepared. He created notes, organized photos, and collected statements, all while maintaining the calm and composed exterior that kept others from suspecting the depth of his skills or the intensity of his preparation. At the same time, he focused on his dog's recovery. Medical care was only the beginning. Emotional healing required trust, routine, and reassurance. He maintained consistent walks, soft-spoken words, and small rewards for calm behavior. Slowly, the dog began to respond, its body relaxing under his guidance, its eyes regaining a sense of trust. These moments were both healing and motivating. Each small step forward reminded him that action, even gentle and patient action, could restore balance after chaos. He also began to engage with the community carefully. Some neighbors approached, offering support or advice. He listened, remaining polite and approachable, but he shared only what was necessary. The man knew that perceptions could be as influential as facts, and he used discretion as another tool. Patience, observation, and quiet diplomacy became just as important as the legal and strategic steps he was taking. Days passed, and the man began to see progress in the legal and personal fronts. The officers involved were required to provide reports, statements were collected, and the documentation he had prepared became crucial. He noticed the subtle shift in demeanor when authorities realized he was organized, composed, and prepared. His calm confidence quietly commanded respect without threat. He had been trained to handle high-stakes situations, and now those lessons applied in the civilian world in ways that required intellect and patience rather than brute force. Through it all, he remained vigilant. He knew that emotions could cloud judgment, that impatience could lead to mistakes, and that small missteps could create setbacks. Each day he revisited his plans, refined his approach, and rehearsed conversations in his mind. He used his experience to anticipate reactions, to stay several steps ahead, and to ensure that every move reinforced his goals. Strategy, observation, and restraint became his tools, guiding every interaction and decision. The emotional impact of the incident also remained. Memories of the shots, the dog's yelp, and the helplessness he had felt resurfaced unexpectedly. Nights were especially difficult. He sometimes lay awake, thinking through alternative outcomes, considering what could have been done differently. These thoughts were not self-recrimination. They were analysis, reflection, and learning. He applied the same clarity and focus he had used in past missions to make sense of the situation, extract lessons, and prepare for future actions. The dog, too, became a source of emotional insight. Its progress mirrored his own ability to manage grief and fear. Slowly they returned to their routines, walks in the morning, quiet evenings at home, careful attention to surroundings. Each step, each interaction reinforced their mutual trust and recovery. The bond between them deepened, strengthened by the shared experience of trauma and healing. He also considered the long-term implications. Fear, misunderstanding, and misjudgment could affect more than one person. They could ripple through a community. He wanted to prevent this from happening again, not only for himself but for others. Awareness, communication, and preparation became his mission. He began documenting advice, strategies, and observations that could help in future situations. He wanted to transform his experience into something meaningful, a lesson that could prevent needless suffering. Every day was deliberate. He balanced legal preparation, dog care, community observation, and personal reflection. Each component reinforced the others, creating a rhythm of resilience. He found moments of quiet satisfaction in small achievements, a step taken without fear, a report filed correctly, a neighbor's acknowledgement of the truth. These moments reminded him that patience and careful planning could yield results even in complex, emotionally charged situations. The man also reflected on morality, responsibility, and restraint. He could have used force, intimidation, or anger to assert himself, but he chose discipline instead. This was not weakness, it was strength. It required courage to remain calm, to act thoughtfully, and to pursue justice without causing harm. He had learned this in life or death situations, and he applied it now in ways that were less visible but equally powerful. Through careful planning, observation, and persistence, he began to see progress. The officers' reports were being reviewed, evidence was being considered, and the community was slowly recognizing the truth. His dog's recovery continued, its confidence returning in small, reassuring increments. He allowed himself brief moments of hope, recognizing that the path forward was not just about accountability, but about restoring balance and trust in his life. At home, evenings remained a place of reflection. He would sit quietly, the dog at his feet, reviewing notes, thinking through strategies, and considering future steps. The quiet moments reinforced his resolve. He had survived worse, endured more complex challenges, and now applied those lessons in a new context. Patience, strategy, and restraint were his weapons, and he wielded them with precision. Despite the progress, he remained alert. Every conversation, every interaction, and every observation mattered. He knew that misunderstandings could recur, that fear could influence decisions, and that patience and preparation were essential. He approached each day with focus, determination, and clarity, understanding that true strength lay not in reaction but in deliberate, thoughtful action. Through it all, the bond with his dog remained central. The animal's trust, loyalty, and recovery provided motivation and emotional grounding. Each small step forward reminded him of why he persevered, why he remained calm, and why he acted with intelligence rather than impulse. The dog's presence was both a comfort and a compass, guiding him through uncertainty and reminding him of what truly mattered. As the days passed, the man began to recognize a shift. The initial shock of the incident was fading, replaced by resolve. He had a plan, resources, and the mental clarity to navigate the challenges ahead. He understood that justice, recovery, and understanding required time, patience, and deliberate effort. And he was prepared to give all of that and more to ensure that the mistakes of the past would not define the future. Evenings grew quieter, and small routines returned. Walks resumed with careful attention, hospital visits decreased, and the dog's confidence strengthened. Yet the lessons of that day remained vivid, a reminder of fragility, responsibility, and the power of calm, disciplined action. He had faced chaos before, and now he faced a different kind of battle, one fought with patience, intellect, and unwavering focus. Through all of this, the man understood something important. Strength was not always about force. Sometimes it was about clarity, strategy, and restraint. Sometimes it was about protecting life, seeking justice, and maintaining integrity in the face of fear and misunderstanding. These truths guided him as he moved forward. Every decision calculated, every action deliberate, every moment an opportunity to restore balance and peace. The path was not easy, and challenges remained. But he had grown through the process, strengthened by adversity and guided by the lessons of his past. And through it all, the bond with his dog remained the heart of his strength, a living reminder of love, loyalty, and the power of careful, thoughtful action in a world too often driven by fear and misunderstanding.